Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz. Now, I've had a little kind of August BookTube holiday, been away for a couple of weeks, but I've been doing lots of reading, including some wonderful reading for Women in Translation Month. And here's a quick review of one of the things that I've read for Women in Translation Month. The Case of Cem by Vera Mutafchieva, published in Bulgaria in 1967. So a sort of like Bulgarian modern classic. But the English translation by Angela Rodel was only published last year, 2024, and that's the first opportunity that us English readers have had to read this let's say 20th century Bulgarian classic. And so full disclosure here, this is a book that I might have missed out on altogether, that I might have never read. I might not have heard of it, or I might have been put off by the fact that it's like 500 pages long. And what a loss that would have been. I am so happy that I read this book. And I was tempted into reading it by two lovely booktubers, Lindy of Lindy Magpie Reads and Sarah of Roadworthy. And I'll link their channels below. And if you don't know both of them already, I warmly recommend that you check out their channels. And thank you both of them for sucking me into reading Cem, because how much I enjoyed this book. Okay, now let's start by talking about Mutafchieva. She was born in 1929, died in 2009, so lived to the age of 80. She's probably the most prominent female novelist in 20th century Bulgaria. So, should I have read her? Obviously I should, but I hadn't. Not a lot of her work available in English is the truth. And interestingly, her main career was as a historian. She was a historian of the Ottoman Empire. And but she took up writing historical fiction. I think Cem was her first historical novel. And she published about 30 or something, all historical novels, kind of in tandem with continuing her academic career. And that's kind of relevant to this book, I guess, because, who do you want to write your historical fiction? You want people who really are so well bedded into the period that they set their books, that they are able, they do the research, but then carry it lightly for you, the reader. And absolutely, that's what she does in the Case of Cem. There are two things that are probably useful to know going into this book. One is that, as you no doubt know, Bulgaria was under the control of the Ottoman Turkish Empire for several hundred years. So that's one thing. And the other is that in 1967, when the book was published, we were at the height of the Cold War, although it was a period of kind of slight liberalisation in Bulgaria compared with sort of the Stalinist years before. Nevertheless, Bulgaria was at that time dominated by, really tight state control, secret police, and a sense of external threat because of the Cold War. And also relevant to know that Mutafchieva's brother defected to the West in 1963, so just a few years before she wrote this book. So that's sort of both the historical context for the book and the contemporary context at the time she was writing it. So this is a book that is both historically accurate and, is a really vivid picture of medieval Europe, medieval Ottoman Empire, and medieval, Western Europe, and what was going on then, and how people lived, right down to the fine detail. It's that, absolutely that, but it's also a book that I guess is looking at a period when the relations between Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the sort of far west of Asia, Turkey and so on, and the Levant, when that was at a key juncture, when things, and particularly for the Balkans, where things could have gone either way. They could have sort of remained part of the West, or they could fall under Ottoman control, and a key moment in that sense. But it's also a book that has enormous resonance, I think, for the contemporary period in which she was writing, she was living, 1960s Bulgaria. So, there's that's your context. That sounds a bit worthy, doesn't it? This is a really good read. The story starts in 1481 with the unexpected death of the Turkish Sultan or Emperor, the Ottoman Emperor, Mehmet Khan, known as Mehmet the Conqueror. He's sort of, he's taken Constantinople, now Istanbul. He's been besieging the Knights of St. John in their stronghold on Rhodes. He's in an expansionist period, and he, out of the blue, he dies, leaving two sons. The eldest, Bayezid, and his favourite, Cem. Cem and Bayezid both would like to succeed their father, and plot ensues. And this is all, like historical fact, as it were. Now, the structure of this book is really interesting, because it's set up, when it says the Case of Cem, that partly refers to this. It's almost like a kind of a trial or a tribunal is the structure. So witnesses are called, witnesses who were involved at the time, who were part of what happened around Cem, and they're called to tell Cem's story and what happened, as if they're sort of sucked back from some afterlife, and then set in front of this tribunal and asked to speak. And they've got nothing to lose. We are given the impression that they are speaking really honestly about their behaviour at the time and other people's behaviour and motivations and what happened. So that's the structure. It's a good structure for telling this story, what becomes clear, and what I didn't really know, but you need to know early on, and you get early on, is that Cem becomes something of a legend, in the time since his death. But at the time when his father died, he was very popular, probably more popular than his brother Bayezid. He was not the obvious heir, but a lot of people kind of quite fancied him for the role. And he ends up, because he isn't immediately successful in fighting Bayezid, he decides to flee. He puts himself in the hands of the Knights of St. John on Rhodes, which may or may not have been a wise thing to do. Well, we know it was not a wise thing. In effect, Cem becomes a kind of a pawn, a hostage, a bargaining counter, I guess, between the Ottomans and various Western states and powers, including the papacy, Venice, the Knights of St. John, the French crown, the Hungarian. They're all out to try and use Cem in their relations with the Ottomans, who are definitely a sort of rising power. As I say, it's a very vivid, lively book. When I talked about the structure, you might think, oh dear, does that mean that it's very sort of bitty and you don't get people to latch onto you? Interestingly, we never hear directly from Cem. We get a good picture of him from the people around him, but we do have other characters that recur, so that we have people to latch onto, I suppose, as a reader. And in particular, there's his attendant and translator and supporter and companion, the poet Sadi. And Sadi probably becomes the character that we're most attached to as readers. There's characters, there's plenty of plot and plotting, so all the period detail that you could wish for, but not in your face. It's just she knows that stuff because she's a historian. And then these really interesting themes around exile and homeland, you know, and obviously the fact that her brother is now in exile, you know, it must be that there's a personal sort of resonance surely in that for her as a writer. Then there's themes around how the Western powers had an opportunity at that time, you know, when Cem defected, in effect, to the West, but could have, you know, competed with his brother. That was an opportunity to push back on Ottoman expansion, to use them against each other, you know, and that if they'd done that, that would have changed the future for Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, you know, those countries that sort of saw themselves perhaps as European but fell under Ottoman rule and saw that as an occupation in a way that, you know, perhaps other countries within the Ottoman Empire, you know, didn't feel, because they had more kind of cultural overlap with the Turks, you know, like, all big Muslim, for example, you know, but the people like the Bulgarians definitely didn't. So it was a missed opportunity. Why did they miss that opportunity? Because of their infighting, their competition amongst themselves, their economic interests, their political interests, you know, really interesting. And then finally, there are themes around surveillance and loyalty and treachery and double dealing and what people may be persuaded to do or forced to do. And, you know, for someone living and writing under you know, communist rule in Bulgaria at that time, that has to have been a kind of day-to-day experience. And, you know, given that Mutafchieva survived as an academic and a writer and a public figure, despite her brother's defection, when many of the families of defectors were, you know, very much punished for that, means she has to have made some compromises to achieve that. So, you know, really, this is a really rich, complex novel with lots going on, but bottom line is it a good read? Yes, absolutely it is. Multi-layered, but I found it particularly towards the end an absolutely, you know, compulsive read. So, a recommendation from Roz. And I hope you're having a good month and reading some good things too.